So we're doing something pretty incredible in this explainer today. We're taking a super dense 16th century epic poem and translating it into a gritty, visceral story of pure human survival. We're talking about Vasco da Gama's legendary 1497 voyage to India. But we're not just going to memorize dry dates or trace lines on old maps. We're actually going to feel the terrifying hardships of this journey through the lens of Portugal's national epic, Os Lusíadas, or the Lusíads. Trust me, this gets intense, and it's absolutely going to change how you view early explorers.
O reckless people, bolder than any the world has known, because you have breached what is forbidden. Okay, that dramatic warning? That is from stanza 41 of the epic, spoken by a terrifying monster named Adamastor. And I want to start with this quote just to set the stakes for us. You have to remember, back in the 15th century, the open ocean wasn't just a big body of water. It was this forbidden mythological realm. Crossing it meant you were defying the natural order itself and inviting wrath. And that wrath, it was incredibly real.
Part 1. An epic voyage begins.
Now, setting sail in July 1497 was the culmination of basically a century of Portuguese exploration, but da Gama's mission was the big one. Just picture the sheer scale of the route. He leaves Lisbon with this tiny fleet, and they have to make this massive, sweeping curve all the way down and around the bottom of Africa. They were battered by storms, dead in the water for long stretches, and it took them nearly 11 agonizing months to finally reach India in May of 1498. Just imagine being trapped on a tiny wooden ship for 11 months in totally uncharted, hostile waters.
To truly wrap our heads around what they suffered, we're using the poet Luís de Camões as our guide today. He published the Lusíads in 1572, taking the actual, historical reality of this voyage and elevating it into a massive divine struggle involving the Greek gods. It's kind of like reading a fantasy novel about dragons, and then finding out the author literally fought one in real life. That is exactly what it's like reading Camões. He wasn't just some armchair poet. He actually survived similar voyages to the East. He lived through shipwrecks and the brutal reality of life at sea. So when he describes the suffering of Vasco da Gama's crew, he's translating his own very real, visceral trauma right onto the page.
Part 2. Sabotage on the shores. You might naturally think the open ocean was the absolute worst part, right? But the second they hit the coastlines, the hardships just multiplied. And this is where the epic brilliantly blends myth with reality. In the poem, Camões writes that the Greek god Bacchus, who viewed the East as his own personal domain, was actively trying to sabotage the Portuguese. Bacchus even disguises himself as a Moor, building fake Christian altars to lure the exhausted crew into deadly coastal ambushes. But the historical reality? When da Gama reached places like Mozambique and Mombasa, he faced intense hostility from local Muslim traders. And logically so. These merchants knew exactly what would happen if Christian competitors crashed their markets. They were simply defending their established trade routes that went through the Red Sea and Egypt. So Bacchus was really just a poetic stand-in for some extremely fierce economic and religious rivalry.
Moving on to Part 3, Sea Storms and Scurvy.
As they pushed further into the absolute unknown, human hostility was matched by just the sheer brutality of nature. And the really crucial point here is how these miseries compounded. I mean, think about it. First, you're becalmed. You're just stuck, baking in the heat with zero wind, going absolutely nowhere for agonizing stretches. Then, out of nowhere, you're driven totally off course by violent ship-breaking storms. When you finally drag yourself to the coast for shelter, you face hostility and ambushes. And all the while, creeping through the crew are the ravages of scurvy. Camões described this so explicitly in Canto V, rampant sickness and mass death just silently stalking the lower decks. The psychological and physical weight of all that hitting you at once is almost unimaginable.
I really want to hit this point home. Camões knew this suffering firsthand. In 1559, on his way back from Macau, he was in a massive shipwreck. 3 out of the 4 ships in his fleet went down. He dealt with imprisonment, debt, and got stranded in Mozambique for 2 years. So when you read his raw, vivid descriptions of rotting teeth, disease, and near death in the Lusíads, you're not just reading Greek mythology. You are literally reading the memoirs of a survivor.
Part 4. The Monster Adamastor.
The ultimate geographical choke point of the whole journey was rounding the Cape of Good Hope. It was deadly, and Camões personified this as a terrifying mythical titan. Let's hear how he describes it in stanza 39. An immense shape materialized in the night air, grotesque and of enormous stature, its complexion earthy and pale. Seriously, put yourself in the shoes of a sailor on that ship. It's pitch black, the ocean is completely raging around you, and the sheer terror of that storm physically manifests in your mind as this towering, grotesque giant blocking your path.
He goes on in that same stanza, its hair grizzled and matted with clay, its mouth coal-black, teeth yellow in decay. Now, this is pure cinematic horror, right? But listen to those specific details, the yellow, decaying teeth, the pale, earthy complexion. The monster literally has the symptoms of scurvy. Camosis is brilliantly taking the physical diseases that were rotting the crew from the inside and turning them into the literal face of the monster they had to defeat. And then, the monster delivers this chilling curse in stanza 42. You have desecrated nature's secrets and the mysteries of the deep, where no human, however noble, should trespass. This totally captures the psychological nightmare of the voyage. The crew didn't just feel like they were fighting bad weather. They felt like they were fighting the universe itself. The ocean was this fiercely forbidding place that promised absolute retribution for their insolence.
And even after they survived the Cape, the nightmare didn't stop. In Canto 6, as they cross the Indian Ocean, Bacchus calls in a major favor. Neptune and a whole council of maritime gods decide to unleash these powerful, apocalyptic winds to just sink the Portuguese armada once and for all. Da Gama literally sees his ships on the brink of total destruction. In the poem, it takes actual divine intervention from Venus, who sends nymphs to seduce and calm the winds to save them. The real-life version? It took 28 days of extreme, perilous sailing right through the absolute worst season of storms before they finally sighted land.
Part 5. Confrontation in Calicut.
On May 20, 1498, they finally make it. They see the mountains of India glimmering in the distance, and Da Gama actually drops to his knees and thanks. But getting there didn't mean the hardships were magically over. Just look at their final trials in India. The epic tells us Bacchus sends a dark vision to a local Muslim priest to stir up a panic. Historically, the fanatical local traders, who obviously saw their livelihoods threatened, showed massive open enmity. The Samaram, the local Hindu Raja, confronts Vasco. At one point, Vasco is actually seized and held as a prisoner. To literally buy his way out, he is forced to drag all the goods from his ships onto the shore just to sell them. He couldn't even set up a permanent trading factory. He was basically running along the coast just to stay alive.
And finally, Part 6, the real cost of discovery. The epic poem naturally spends a ton of time on the glory, the divine favor, and this island of love that Venus prepares as a reward for the sailors. But history demands we look at the incredibly sobering reality of their return journey, which took an entire extra year, 55. Out of the whole original crew that set sail with such massive ambitions, only 55 companions were left when the admiral finally cast anchor back in Lisbon in August 1499. The rest, claimed by the sea, by violence, and by disease. Da Gama went straight to the Church of Our Lady of Balim to offer thanks, essentially surrounded by ghosts.
It's a really sharp, brutal pivot from this idea of epic glory to the absolute, devastating human sacrifice that was required to open the sea route to India. Yes, it fundamentally changed global commerce and built a massive Portuguese maritime empire, but it was built on the backs of men who succumbed to scurvy in the dark, who drowned in tempests, and who faced the real-life atomasters of the ocean. The grand myth is ultimately grounded in a very bleak, undeniable historical reality of loss.
So I'll leave you with this to chew on. We read the Lusiads today, and we absolutely marvel at the gods and the monsters. But does mythologizing our history like this actually help us remember the sheer heroism and endurance of those sailors? Or does turning scurvy into a giant Focoro and trade wars into divine intervention obscure the real human cost of discovery? It's a heavy question, but it's one we absolutely have to ask when we look back at the people who mapped our world. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the stories we tell.